Hello, I'm Elaine Slaughter, the podcast host of the Fabulous Friendpreneurship Show. In this special series, we are interviewing the authors of an exciting new book, Eight Qualities of Great Leadership, the critical elements for now and future success, to get their in-depth thoughts. So today's guest is Anastasia Nederson, CEO and founder of Wisnook.com. Anastasia is the author of the chapter on leadership resilience. And I think today leaders all around the world need to absolutely have resilience. So welcome to our show, Anastasia.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and dive into a little bit details of what resilient qualities are important and how can we measure it and also how we can improve on it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So could you tell us before we get started a little bit about your background and education experience and how you became the founder of Wisnook?
Yes, so I started more in the technical industry. So I am mechanical engineer and bioengineer by training. And so a lot of my professional career has been in the space, like biotechnology, medical devices space. And over time, I was just like most people, as you grow in your industry, you tend to be put into more and more management roles. And at some point, I kind of came face to face to now I'm looking at an opportunity, but at that point, it was a very difficult time in my life. And that difficult time in my life is really became because of a toxic work environment, because of poor leadership, and it had a huge impact on my life. And so I think that that's what sparked interest in the space. And as I started kind of at first learning for myself, right, what skills and qualities that I need to develop in order to better be equipped to handle these type of situations, and become a better leader myself, but also eventually led me to found Wisnook, which is basically a simulation-based gamified team assessment tool. And so one of the games that we offer is an Escape from Mars game. And the team basically is doing some of the fun puzzles and kind of communicating with each other. But in the background, we're doing very sophisticated data analytics and provide input to the team on what areas they doing great, and so they can kind of really feel empowered and strong about, and then what areas maybe they can improve on or start paying attention to. And so as I kind of started that process, it led me to a lot more kind of wider opportunities in the space. And so I'm really excited that to continue evolve and to continue learning about team dynamics, team efficacy, leadership, and kind of this space.
Yeah, that's a very important thing because if you don't have team leadership and a good foundation as a leader, it can destroy a company. As you said, you were in a toxic work environment. There's nothing worse than a toxic work environment because it just depresses you both physically and mentally. And you feel like powerless to get out of that unless
Absolutely.
you quit your job, and you don't want to do that, right? You'd rather not do that, but some workplaces are like that, very, very toxic, and it takes a lot to turn around a toxic workplace. You have to really want to change it.
Yeah.
And
And a lot of us are not prepared, right? We
mhm,
don't know what to look out for. And so when
exactly.
most of us found ourselves in these type of situations or circumstances, we tend to kind of go internal. We tend to
Yes.
see faults in ourselves. Something's wrong
Mm,
with me.
yeah.
And that starts over time because that experience was over a duration of 3+ years. And so it
Hmm.
was a long period of time where
Yeah.
it kind of slowly eats away at
Way.
your,
Yeah.
I mean,
And you
honestly,
think
your
if you
identity.
and as you said, you think it's your fault.
Hmm.
And really, it isn't your fault, but it puts a lot of stress on you going into that toxic work environment every day. It really does. So
But I
I'm,
think that there's one area that it came later to me. But a lot of times when we find ourselves in these environments, there's this kind of likelihood to find yourself in this victimhood space,
Mhm, mhm.
and there's space for that, to for those feelings and whatever, but it doesn't allow you for change, and it doesn't allow you to build that resilience if you
Right.
just find yourself in this victimhood. And I definitely found myself in that space where I felt the whole world was against me and I was just kind of a victim. And so I do think that there's an opportunity, both with knowledge, but even more importantly, practice, where we can start actually getting ourselves out of this like space of victimhood and kind of feel more empowered on what can we do. And it could be as simple as leaving that toxic environment, but there could be opportunities to make changes and create a better environment.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to explore with you the resilience, both the individual and the collective, and discuss with you the critical skills that owners need to to develop when it comes to leadership resilience.
Yes, I mean, overall, if you read books about resiliency or just go online and start searching, you will find just a plethora of information. And it doesn't mean one of them is right and one of them is wrong. It just means because the quality of resilience is um, more dynamic, and there's kind of multifaceted qualities about resiliency. And that's why it makes it challenging, I think, to really first define it, but more importantly, to qualify it, to measure it, right, and to kind of understand who has resilience and who doesn't. But in my work, we did focus more on qualities such as communication, effective communication, emotional intelligence, which is understanding your own emotional drives and behaviors, but also of other people that you work with in a collective group. We look at ability to work in parallel and kind of understand how to delegate. We also look at curiosity, right, at its basic form. Because if you think about it, in order to overcome a challenging circumstance, you need to have enough imagination that there is a solution, right? That there is an opportunity for some kind of change, some kind of growth. And that is, I would say, potentially impossible without that element of curiosity, creativity, imagination. And so that particular quality we very much emphasize because I think it allows us to stay in that more positive place and grow.
So we're not born with resilience. It's something that we can develop. Would you say that?
I definitely was when I grew up in a bit more um, sort of basically not a growth mindset. That's how I was trained when I was younger. So a lot of the things that were taught to me is that you either smart or you're not. You either, and so resilience to me until maybe 10 years ago was kind of in that realm that I believe that people either are resilient and they have that quality and they're born with it, or not. And I definitely learned, and I'm a big believer that resilience is something you can cultivate and you can practice. And not to take away from some people that are naturally more resilient. You know, we all have our
Mhm.
own strengths and weaknesses, and resilience can fall into that quality that some people just naturally um, have that, right? Even when they were kids, younger
Yeah,
kids, you know, when they fall, how do they respond to,
yeah.
having um, pain or having a situation that they don't like. So some of this is starts when we're younger, and I do believe that parents bear a really big responsibility to help navigate resilience
Yeah.
and teach us.
And you mentioned that leaders can't operate in a vacuum, that there has to be collective resilience. So what are the 5 elements that we can track over time about resilience? What can we measure in the collective?
Yes, so we measure response time, which is in the collective. We can call it a team, a group, doesn't really matter. There is a time that it takes for us to communicate to each other.
Mhm,
And the MIT's Collective Intelligence Center, they looked a lot at this idea of collective intelligence, which collective resilience fall into that umbrella, right,
mhm.
of collective intelligence. And the response time is they found that a group that has a more or less even response time, which means that when I ask of you something, Elaine, can you do this and this? How long does it take you to respond? And if you take longer than the average in the group, then it's already kind of an outlier. And the same with too fast. There might be an individual in the group that just really, really quick. And so they found that it's a significant quality that does track with collective intelligence. And so we measure response time because it gives us an understanding of what is that communication pattern within the group. And if obviously there will be some changes, but we want more or less this understanding if the entire team feels that they need to think about it and respond in due time. If everybody in the same team feels the same way, that's totally great. And the same way, if there's an expectations that you have to respond right away, but the challenges is when there's a big gaps,
Yeah.
right? And so then it leads to frustrations, miscommunications, and misunderstandings.
Yeah, I could understand that. And I'm sure certain industries are different. You know what I mean? Whether you're an engineer and you like to really ponder and sort of set things out systematically, or whether you're in the social media space where everything is in a nanosecond, right?
Absolutely.
So the people that are working in teams in different industries or different companies might have different response times.
Right, and it's okay to set it too. Set those
Mhm.
expectations initially. It doesn't have to be kind of this something that either we have it or not. It's okay when the team gets together or again organizationally set some rules, set some expectations, so then everybody feels that there's a buy-in on kind of what
Yeah,
the
yeah,
standards or the norms.
exactly. Now, when you're conducting this, do you explain that to the team members that you're testing? Do you explain the results and,
So we do.
how they can improve that as a team?
Absolutely. And we also made a choice to not provide some of this detail initially in order to have
Mhm.
a more natural behavior within
Yeah.
this gamified environment or simulation environment. And so we want for them to focus on some other things. And so these natural behaviors, they tend to come up and then we can point them out and say, well, in this, this is what your response was, and this is what you can do to improve on that.
So that's one of the main elements. Could
That's
you,
one. So the
yeah,
next one is communication pattern. So
yeah.
communication pattern is basically about equal distribution of conversational turn taking. So that more or less refers to engagement, right?
Mhm.
So you don't want to see in the team where somebody's speaking all the time and there's somebody who doesn't speak at all. So you want more or less equal distribution of
Yeah.
conversational turn taking. And it is a really good indication of resiliency too, because then especially for that collective resilience, because then when there's a problem, there is a sense of a team that can handle that problem, right? And then they each can contribute some kind of solution or suggestions and feel comfortable that their thoughts, their solutions will be heard.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want one team member to overpower all the others so that they don't have a voice in the decision making or the communication.
Right. We also, in specifically for that communication pattern, we also look into the quality of that communication. So how positive or negative it is,
Mhm.
or subjectivity detection, which is basically, is it more opinion oriented or is it factual? And especially when there is big challenges, and that's when we look at resilience, right? Because there's
Mhm.
something that happened that's challenging, potentially even your existence. And at that point, we really want that equal distribution, but on top of it, to stay neutral or positive and stay more factual than opinionated. Because
Mhm.
in that moment, it's really helpful to create that effective communication and get to specific solutions or outcomes that are needed.
Yeah, great, great. So what are the other elements?
Right. So that was two. So there's
Mhm.
total five that we currently look at WSNOC, but of course there could be other ones, but we identified as those are the key. So the next one we look at is network analysis. So network analysis is basically an analysis of the kind of a signature of the team, and you look at the communications of each team member to all the other team members. So that means we can see the frequency, who talked to whom. And so when you look visually at this graph, the network analysis graph, you'll have a pretty good sense of that team overall dynamic. And so what we look for in these graphs is anomalies. Like, for example, maybe there is an individual that's completely isolated and was not
Mhm.
able to talk to anybody else. We look for cliques forming.
Mhm.
So you have a large group, but then you have a really tight group who talk just to each other.
Mhm.
And we also look at positive signs, which is a leadership sign. So that usually shows up in a network analysis with a centralized figure who is more or less equal in communication with every other individual in the team, and a few others. So for us, it's a very visual kind of metric, and I think majority of people can you know take a look and get a sense of what the dynamic in the team is.
Great, great. So moving on, what are the other elements?
So the next one is innovation. I mentioned to you a little bit before about creativity, imagination. So we really do highly regard that element. And then in the collective groups, it basically shows in a new environment, and for all our teams when they first join the simulated game, it's a new environment. They don't know what are the rules, what is expected of them, and so they are very much challenged on trying to kind of understand what's even needed from them. And we measure how much they look for alternative solutions. Maybe there's some secrets hidden. So there's lots and lots of opportunities for finding kind of less obvious ways to solve puzzles. And so the teams that show more of these clues, and we measure it through the entire game, so you get kind of a good database of all the things that the team has done. And then, yeah, innovation metric, the higher it is, the more resiliency the team shows.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. So what is the last one?
The
Uh,
last one, and I honestly regard it as probably one of the more important one. So if there was one that you want to focus on, that would be it, and that's psychological safety. And the reason why psychological safety, I believe, is so critical is because all the other things you can kind of work with the team and have opportunities to, um, find better practices on distribution of communication or encourage innovation and creativity. But if you don't have psychological safety, it will be really, really difficult to work on the other qualities. And psychological safety is really an ability of individuals to display high level of comfort to communicate kind of their challenging issues. Maybe there's problems, make suggestions and solutions. And when the group exhibits low psychological safety, we see that that team struggles in general. So it, to us, on all the data that we've collected, this one is probably one of the higher indicative metrics of challenges within the team.
So do you think that psychological safety means that the team members just don't feel that they are going to be heard. They feel reluctant to voice their opinion because they might be judged or that kind of thing. So it doesn't create a safety net for them because they climb right up. They don't want to share.
Yes, and then if you can imagine, some level of gradient, an extreme version of this would be a toxic work
Yeah,
environment where you actually feel afraid
yeah.
for speaking out because you might get some kind of consequence for that,
Yes,
right?
the consequence. Yeah. And that's yeah, that if you don't have the psychological safety, as you mentioned, within the organization, you're not going to progress at all.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I would, if there was just one thing that, leaders could focus on, is creating that psychological safety environment, and then checking in with people. There's many different ways to check in, looking for signs, right, of low psychological safety, and really encouraging a safe space.
But it all starts with the leader, right? You have to do your own self-awareness check and also um, your self-leadership. What kind of leader are you? As Trevor Stockwell says in his chapter, like if you haven't delved into the kind of leader you are and you want to be,
Yeah,
um, you're never going to get very far with the collective at all because you're the barrier, right? You're the one that's
yeah.
impeding the progress of the collective because you just don't get it yourself.
And people look up to, right? Like
Mhm.
you as a leader set the tone.
Yeah,
And so, and really, in a kind of direct way, you're a role model. So
yeah.
your behaviors, how you handle stress, how you show up to kind of meetings and other things,
Hmm.
that sets a tone for the entire team. And it's possible, and I've seen those environments in the work where if, let's say, the leadership is not great, then there could be these what we call cliques, and that's why we look out for them. Because if there might be unsafe environment for the entire group, sometimes we see some individuals kind of create these smaller groups where they do feel safe.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So could you give us examples? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am putting you on the spot. Can you give me examples of who you think is a good leader in business and examples of people that you don't feel are that great?
And are you thinking of like a higher profile or?
Yeah, a higher profile, somebody that we would all know.
Yeah, and I don't know if our listeners are familiar with Mind Valley. Um, there's Vishay Lukiani, that's the founder of this organization, and they're actually pretty big now. But they created basically a space for online courses for self-improvement, for leadership, and so a lot of actually famous people do their workshops there. Um, and I really, really appreciate his level of leadership. You can find him on social media or on lots of online articles about him. But maybe not everybody on this podcast that might know of him, but definitely check him out. Mind Valley, um, and I think just in general that company culture, the values that identified, and specifically Vishen, who started this all. I think it's brilliant how he was able to carry it on as the company grew to the sizes that it is now and the outreach that it has. So I think to me that's yeah, it's very impressive and something that I look up to. But I feel like in this particular space, it's easy to identify because his company is about this, right?
Yeah,
And so yes, it's possible sometimes where the leadership of a kind of team development soft skill kind of company is mm, not practicing what it preaches. It happens, unfortunately. But in general, most people who start these companies, they're passionate about it, and this is what they want to bring to the world. So I do think that examples of maybe technology companies or companies that kind of not in this more in the space that you and I in um, that's would be also really impressive. And I honestly, I don't know if I can single out anybody because our leaders, as far as politics goes, I'm in many ways actually even disappointed quite a bit. Um, and large corporations, the names that, if I say them, most people will know. I I have a hard time because of the certain decisions that are made and the public communication, the potentially lawsuits that have come out that show that there's definitely issues. And in addition to that, the statistics, the latest statistics in kind of psychological safety, just engagement of employees, employees that take a lot of sick leave and or burnout, and they kind of try different things. And so those statistics unfortunately do not show that a lot of our leadership right now is doing the best job that they can. And so I think that there is definitely room for improvement.
Yeah, totally. So, what are the three critical phases of cultivating resilience? There's three, very important phases. So, what are they?
Yeah, so they are planning, adapting, and transforming.
Hmm.
And you can think of them kind of separately. And if there's a sequence, I do think that that's the sequence. First start with planning, and then learning how to adapt, and then transforming. But I also think that there's an opportunity also to kind of work on each one of them at the same time, and not necessarily um, learning one and then the next and then the next. But there is a level of that sequence because it's probably the easiest one for us to just sit down, piece of paper or computer, and just start kind of thinking scenarios of, okay, if this happens, what can we do? And that's the planning phase, right?
Hmm.
There isn't in the planning phase, there isn't necessarily any type of behavioral changes that you have to think about, or emotional response or anything like that, right? It's just you thinking down and you, with your analytical mind, really pointing out all the details of particular scenarios. And so a good leader should do this, and especially for circumstances that just kind of unforeseen and very unlikely, but having certain, like, go through that thought process and understand, okay, if this happens, how do I want my team to respond? Who are the kind of the key um, people who would drive this, so I think that that's really important. And like I said, in some ways it's the easiest because it is with our analytical mind and just requires maybe some consistency and discipline, but not necessarily changing yourself, which is almost always like much harder.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the next one, adapting. So adapting is when the situation already has happened, how do we practice in the moment to adapt to that situation, right? And so it can start pretty small. When you first find yourself, I don't know, driving in the freeway and somebody cuts you off.
Hmm.
There is a situation in the moment when you catch yourself getting frustrated or angry. How do you start, um, first of all, paying attention to that, and second of all, start adapting and kind of be like, okay, well, I'll just take, the next exit or whatever it is, or I'll just move to a different lane, whatever it required to just see the situation as is and then just adapt to it. There are some similarities, I think, to adapting and transforming, but under transforming, there's a much more active role that I want to point out, and that's why I do separate them. But I do think that adapting and transforming often go hand in hand.
So
And
let's talk about transformation then. Is that always something bigger
um,
or not necessarily?
I don't think so. I think transformation can happen in small changes, but I believe we know that we have a certain level of transformation happen when we face very difficult situation. Because on the smaller things, you don't know your level of resilience. Just because you were able to, I don't know, your meeting got canceled, and then just like, oh, then that's okay. I'll just push it to another time slot. It's small things day to day that still need practice to adapt and make certain transformational changes in yourself to be able to handle them better. But you really don't know if kind of that level of transformations that you have done with the work until something kind of more drastic happens in your life. And then as you're handling it and as you're figuring out, oh, I have these tools, I have these um, emotional support or emotional, because it's not always external. um, for myself, for example, there is, over time, as I've been focusing on building my resiliency, um, I kind of created my own support systems in my own psyche. And I don't know if that makes
Mhm.
sense at all, but there's certain things I can fall into within myself to be supported. And some of them, like I said, it's more tools like meditation,
Mhm.
or I sometimes, for example, use even hypnosis to access kind of the deeper levels of consciousness and to kind of be able to provide that sense of like I can do it, like affirmation. So there's so
Mhm.
many different tools, and I can't really get into all of them right now, but I do think that we really know that we've grown when we face a kind of a bigger issue or a bigger kind of challenge.
Yeah, the mind is an exceptional thing, as a exceptional vessel that you can change your thoughts and find coping mechanisms to get over, to develop your resilience and to have a better outcome so that if you don't like the way you were handling things before, you can change that. And with practice, then that becomes your new kind of psyche, right? Of how you're going to deal with something.
Yeah, and it starts, like I said, that's why to me the transformation does start on smaller things.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have maybe a difficult relationship with somebody and you need to say no, right? There's so many opportunities to
Yeah,
practice resilience,
yeah.
and once we become aware of both the circumstance, what is actually happening realistically, not with our worrying mind and catastrophizing mind, but actually like, okay, what is the situation? But additionally, of our internal behavioral patterns, what do we tend to do? And in order to intercept that pattern, that is also part of that resilience, because you understand really well all the inner working of your mind and where
Mhm.
you tend to go, and you intercept it and say, no, I'm going to do this
Yeah,
instead.
yeah. So it's a conscious decision to change your own behavior. If you don't like the way you've been reacting to something, then you can change that. We can all do that, right?
Exactly. And I break it up even a little bit further in the chapter on kind of, because it helps, I think, for us
Mhm.
to kind of have these different areas or focus areas, I guess we can call them. And so there's the physical resilience, mental resilience, emotional resilience, and collective resilience. So I break it up into this because then it again allows to um, create a little bit of a roadmap for ourselves to kind
Yeah.
of, okay, maybe I have very low tolerance for physical discomfort. Can I start working in that area? What does the mental resilience means, and kind of how can I evolve that? And the same with emotional resilience and collective. To me, it's very important to work on the first three before on yourself before you start working on the collective resilience, because it in order to even to start understanding what the collective resilience means for your team, you have to really do the work on yourself.
Yeah, you have to dig deep and be very honest with yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that's where assessments are helpful because there is that level of
Yeah.
unbiased
Yes,
feedback you
exactly.
receive. But if you do have some individuals in your life that you know they're not in competition with you, they want the best for you, they are honest, but honesty can sometimes have
Hmm.
kind of the positive, constructive side, but sometimes it could be just hurtful and not necessarily useful or valuable. And so just also of understanding who are those people in your life that you can go to that could provide you also some of the behaviors they noticed that might be an area that you can work on.
So this developing resilience can work in all aspects of your life, not just your business life, but it can you can use these skills in your personal life as well. How you deal, say, with your children or with your spouse or your neighbor or something like that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I think that when you practice that resilience from that perspective, not just in business, you can have a much more wholesome life
Yeah.
because all areas of your life are you feel that you can handle, or you have the support in place when you feel that you are not handling it.
Hmm.
And, and then you can, in order to build resilience, there's a lot of elements that you have to learn how to do, like awareness, I mentioned
Yeah.
a few times. And that awareness can be critical in your personal relationship with your significant other, with your children, with friends, with anybody, really, right?
Yeah.
When you kind of that in tune with the inner workings of your beautiful mind.
Well, thank you so much, Anastasia, for this fabulous podcast on resilience. And I'd like to invite our audience to check out wiznook.com and learn more about Anastasia's work using the gamification approach to help teams to be stronger and better. And I think this is a very unique way to and a fun way, in a sense, to measure independently these skills and invite people to take these tests in a fun way so that they don't feel threatened, right? I think this is amazing to do it using a gamification tool, sort of like an escape room.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the big vision, that not to be frightened by the
Yeah,
results, but more encouraged and inspired to, hey, what can we change? And that's again that growth mindset, right?
yeah. But that's a very innovative approach to handling the testing, I think, and I think it's fabulous. So thank you once again, Anastasia. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Pleasure all mine, and thank you.
Okay, thank you again.